Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started with our session today. I want to say welcome to our training. This is number 6 in our 8-part series of supported decision making. Appreciate that you've joined us today. Next slide.
All right, so I'll start with some housekeeping. My name is Kaylee. I'll be going over a few important points before we begin. Just a reminder that this training has been approved for 1 social work CEU, and you must be on the training the entire time and complete the evaluation that will be sent out in the chat at the end of the training to receive a certificate. Continuing education rules indicate that if you are over 5 minutes late or depart early, you forfeit your CEs for the entire training. This is a national rule that OCHN must enforce, or we could lose our provider status to provide CEs in the future. If you do not need a social work CE certificate, you can always get a certificate of attendance by completing the evaluation as well. If you're not familiar with Teams, you can ask questions through the chat or by raising your hand. The chat can be accessed through the bubble icon, and you can raise your hand by pressing the hand icon under the reactions. I don't think anybody is on the phone, but if there is, you can mute and unmute by pressing *6. So I think I've covered it all, so I'm going to pass this back over to Vicki.
Thanks, Kaylee. So thanks again for attending our training. We want to certainly thank our partners who have helped us develop this series, as well as our series that we provided last year. And that is Mary Sheehan-Bugard, who is from the Development Disabilities Council, very instrumental in helping us develop our content, as well as getting our trainers lined up. And then also Kimberly Hoga from Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, who's helping us get the word out in the Southeast Michigan here, so that we can have as many people as possible really learn about options to guardianship and what tools are available for supported decision making. This training really came out of a goal from our local supported decision making work group here at OCHN, who felt it was important that people didn't really understand or know what some tools or options might be. And so providing them with information would be helpful. So this is one of their goals, is to provide this information. Certainly, we work very closely with our state supported decision making work group, who has offers trainings all over the state, as well as working on a toolkit with all these different tools in it. Next slide. So today's session is about supported decision making in medical situations. And our presenter is Jan Lampman. She was a longtime CEO of ARC of Midland, been very involved with individuals with disabilities for a long time, and is a great advocate. She currently is a consultant, has her own business, and she's very involved as well as at our state level supported decision-making work group. So Jan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So go ahead, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to start with a story. I like to always start with a story, and some of you have heard about Mary before. Mary is the African-American lady sitting in the wheelchair. Next to her, the young gentleman, his name is Justin. That is my son. Then you have me and my 2 grandchildren, Sullivan and Eleanora May. So Mary is my sister, and the way that she came to be my sister was that she was coming out of an institution and moving into a group home in the community, and her own mother had died, and there were no other family people in her life. And so she decided that she had met me as a direct support professional in the group home where she lived. And we used to have these like picnics where you could invite your family, and, you know, like these little social gatherings. And so my husband had been to the picnic and my dad had gone to the picnic, and Mary decided that she wanted to be in my family. So she announced that and decided that one day. And then a few years down the road, and so she came to all of our family functions, and, you know, my dad just always takes in there. I have lots of siblings that aren't biologically mine because of my father. So anyway, so Mary became a part of our family. And then a couple years down the road, Mary Mary was going to transition out of what's called an ICFMR, which was back then a group home that was really funded by the institution, was almost an arm of the institution administratively. And she was going to be able to move into one of these brand spanking new community living facilities, they called them, which was just still a group home, but it was smaller, and it was not funded through the institutional dollars any longer. It was some of these brand new spanking dollars that were coming from Medicaid in other ways. And so she was very excited about that, but someone noticed that her mother, who had been her guardian, had died, 3 years before, and said, well, we can't do this without a guardian. She can't move out of the ICFMR into this small community home unless there's a guardian to give the consent, which we thought was really dumb because she'd gone 3 years. She'd managed to make it 3 years without a guardian, but whatever. So there was a public guardian in our county, which was who they were. The social worker, the case manager, was just directed, go apply for, go file the petition in court for this public guardian to become Mary's guardian. But the case manager, the social worker, knew that Mary would not do well having someone who didn't really know her making decisions on her behalf. They just thought it, she had a really good case manager who valued the staff in the home and valued other people that knew the folks that he served really well. He knew that if we said that Mary wouldn't like it, and Mary said that Mary wouldn't like it, that maybe Mary was right, that she wouldn't like it. So anyway, we had the novel idea of asking Mary who she would like as her guardian, and she identified my husband, Mark. She said she wants Mark to be her guardian. Now, Mark was an accountant, and knew nothing about human services, knew nothing about being someone's guardian, didn't even know there was such a thing at that time. But he was asked if he would ever be willing to do that for Mary, and he loved Mary. And so he said yes. And so we went to court, and Mark became Mary's guardian. The judge approved the petition, and Mark accepted the appointment, and he became Mary's guardian. And so as Mark and Mary and her staff were like leaving the courthouse, I happened to be there too. I wasn't working that day, but I was there just to support my husband, right? And we were leaving the courtroom, and the same social worker that had been so willing to listen to Mary and her staff about, this guardianship thing, had also been given a directive by his supervisor to get Mark to sign a consent for Mary to receive the hepatitis B vaccine. Because back then, this was in the 1980s, and when folks were coming out of institutions, lots of people were coming out of those institutions with hepatitis B, and so it was a big deal. And so they wanted to, vaccinate people that, had lived there or whatever. And, Mary had managed to survive without getting Hep B while she was in the institution, and she didn't really like shots. And she sort of knew how you got the disease, and so she didn't think she was probably going to get it, and so she didn't want the shot. So she kept saying no, and so they thought, oh, this is our chance. We've got a guardian can sign the consent. So the first thing that happened is a social worker asked Mark to please sign those consents for the hepatitis B vaccine, and Mark turned to Mary and said, Mary, do you want to get this vaccine? And she said, nope, I don't. And so then he had this conversation with her right there in the courthouse about, like, what's the shot for? What does it do? What are the pluses and minuses? And Mary's answer continued to be no. And so Mark turned to the social worker and said, yeah, no, we're going to decline to get the hepatitis B vaccine at this time. And although he was her guardian and he was the one with the legal authority, right, to make that medical decision, that's not how Mark executed that responsibility, right? What he did instead was he talked to Mary, and Mary made the decision as to whether she was going to get that hepatitis B vaccine. Mary and Mark were engaging in supported decision-making in a medical situation, and they didn't even know that's what they were doing. They thought they were just, Mark actually, and Mary, I think, both thought that guardianship relationship meant that he was at her beck and call, and he was supposed to help her with the things that she wanted and needed. And so the way that Mark chose to help Mary at that time was to ask Mary what she wanted and then advocate for what she was asking for. A few years down the road, Mark and Mary realized that, he didn't have to be her guardian to have those conversations with her and help her with those things. And so with some support of the professionals that worked with Mary at that time, they went back to court and they petitioned to court to restore Mary's rights and terminate the guardianship, which the judge, again, agreed to do. And then Mary signed a very simple power of attorney form, which I will show you later in the presentation, that really told the doctors and the people at CMH and all the professionals that she identifies that Mark is the person that helps her make decisions. And so when there's a decision to be made, she wants the doctor to talk to Mark and her. And then she and Mark will talk, and then they will decide together. I mean, it's worded in a certain way, the way that Mary wanted it set up, and it's written in very plain language so that Mary knows what she's signing and understands it and agrees to it. But then also doctors can understand it and agree to it and understand what their role is and how they're supposed to work together with Mary and Mark. So just a little postscript to the story before I move on to the next slide. Mark, unfortunately, died suddenly and unexpectedly at the age of 50, which is, gosh, 9 years ago now. And so that left Mary without her person, right? And so this was when Justin was 22 years old when Mark died. And so when we were talking to Mary about who would she like to do another power of attorney, and if so, who would she like on it, I was no longer working for her. Like I had stopped being a direct support professional and stopped working for any agency that supported Mary years and years ago, right? So she and I were truly are truly just sisters. And so I made an assumption that she was going to say that she wanted me to help her make her medical decisions, but she said, "No, Jan, you're too bossy. I want Justin." So now currently my son Justin, he was 22 at the time, but now he is going to be 32 on his next birthday, is Mary's medical power of attorney. And so when Mary got a cancer diagnosis, she went to Justin, and she and Justin did all the research and figured out where the best place to get treatment was, and what, there were different kinds of radiation and so on and so forth that you could get. And Justin and Mary figured it out together. And then that's how the doctors, that's who the doctors listened to. They listened to Mary with some help from Justin. And that's how we continue to this day. She had to have a small medical procedure that I thought I could just go with her because Justin was working. And I get there and she's like, "Where's Justin?" And we had to get him on FaceTime so that she could do the small medical procedure because she didn't really want to do it without him. So that's just a story of how that a person who has lots of medical needs and also lots of needs for support was able to pull together some people in her life to help her make those decisions so that she didn't need to use guardianship to do that. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of some nuts and bolts around that. So thank you. So I wanted to just kind of review, and I know you've all probably been on some training about guardianship, but there's lots of things that people get concerned about with regard to the person who might be seen as vulnerable, right? It could be education, safety, medical decisions, which we're talking about today, but there's other stuff too, finances, communication, sexuality, which also sometimes connects to those medical decisions, right? And then legal, which again, sometimes can connect to those medical decisions. And so that's the laundry list of reasons that we sometimes think people need a guardian. I will tell you that depending on where you are in the lifespan, or whether or not you've got lots of complex medical situations, any one of these different concerns can be the one that rises to the top. But very often, right, it's a healthcare situation. It's healthcare decisions that people get really worried about. And so often guardianships are put in place just to help with medical decisions. And so we're going to talk today about other ways to do that. So if we could go to the next slide. I did want to just point out, why are we doing this? Why do we keep having these trainings about alternatives to guardianship and supported decision-making and other alternatives? And the reason is because in the state of Michigan, we really have historically overused that tool of guardianship, right, to support people. The national core indicators back in 2017, 2018, in their survey, they found that 81% of Michiganders with intellectual and developmental disabilities will end up under a guardianship. And nationally, it was about 43% at that point in time. I feel like we've got some numbers that are where we've seen the national number go down to around 41%, but the Michigan number continues to hover right around 81%. I mean, really, that's a very high number. So we really do need to all be talking about this and helping people. So next slide. So why do we need to worry so much about that 81% number? Because a guardian becomes the sole decision maker in where people live, whether or not to consent to or prevent medical treatment, determining about travel and spending money and, you know, everything, even something as simple as getting your picture taken and put on a brochure or posted publicly somewhere, right? Your guardian can make that decision for you if you have one. So there's lots of reasons why we want to try to avoid guardianship if we can, just because sometimes people get put in a position of someone else who maybe loves them, but maybe doesn't know how they would really want to do it, right? Making those decisions. Next slide, please. So what is supported decision making? We know we all need supporters, helpers, consultants in our lives to help make good decisions, whether we have a disability or not. You know, I go back to Mary's cancer diagnosis, and you know, immediately when she found out, I mean, she didn't just talk to Justin. I got to be in on the conversations too. Justin's wife was in on the conversations. You know, the people the staff that worked with Mary, the provider, the case manager, you know, lots of people were involved in those conversations, helping Mary and helping Justin to figure out what was going to be the best course of treatment for her, right? Well, I think about when my father, the man who brought Mary into our family in the first place, when my father developed lung cancer, you know what? He did the exact same thing. In fact, just a point of interest, my son Justin was the one that also did the research and found the best place for my father to receive his lung cancer treatment. So, you know, we all do that. It's not just this special thing we do because somebody has an intellectual disability. We all seek out the people that we love and trust, right, to help us when we've got big decisions. Next slide, please. So I just, you know, again, just to sort of beat the point home, substitute decision making is what guardianship is, right? So guardianship is substitute decision making, which means that the civil right that I have is handed to someone else to exercise on my behalf. That's kind of a way to look at it, right? So I have the right to make decisions in my life, but when I have a guardian, those rights are handed to another person to make those decisions. Whereas supported decision making is more of a process, and it helps people with and without disabilities, because really we all engage in this at times, to retain and exercise their own rights and make and communicate their choices. And then, you know, if you need support to do that, you've got that freely chosen support that you have brought around yourself. Next slide. So how do you get started with it? You know, you have a conversation, you find people that are willing to assist. In a minute, I'm going to ask Amy to talk a little bit about that. You plan, you communicate, you set up agreements like what originally Mark and Mary did with the simple power of attorney form, which I will show you, right? Or some other kind of agreement. There are patient advocate forms that you can get. You can just write something out as by way of instructions, right? It can be very formal or it can be very informal, but setting up some kind of agreement so everybody knows their roles, and then just communicating that to your doctors, to your, you know, your other family members, to whomever it is that might need to know that information. Sometimes people they carry like a little, you know, card in their purse or whatever. Next slide, please. So let's start by talking about, oh shoot, you know what? Okay, so we're going to talk about life course tools, and I did something bad because I usually manage my slides, and so then I can go in and show you tools. And so now somebody else is managing my slides. So is it Kaylee? Are you the one that's doing the slides?
Yes, that's me.
Can you do this? Can you take us to lifecoursetools.com? Can you open that up, you know, open a window and then share that screen?
Yes. Give me
okay, because I want to show you. I want to show you a tool that's called comes out of the Charting the Life course tools that I think will be, wow, I get to see you all. I never usually get to see everybody. Hi, people. Because I want to go through that and I want to give you some examples. And Amy, who is on the call, Amy, you want to quick introduce yourself while she's getting that pulled up?
I am a rights educator for association and a peer mentor for the state and Oakland County.
So Amy is a peer mentor, and so she's actually going to be using these tools. Okay, now if you can go to the Life Course Library and go to Fundamental Tools in English. What happened here? There we go. Oop, person-centered. Oh, what happened?
Must just be loading.
Okay.
Jen, do you have my life course tools I filled out? We can pull that up fast.
No, because I want to use a different tool than what we used.
Okay.
Okay, so all right, so actually go back to the Life Course Library again. Thank you. And then go to Exploring Life Stages. And then see Supported Decision Making. Exploring Life Stages. Okay. Okay, go all the way to the bottom. Keep going. Keep going. All right, there should be, oh, okay. Yeah, so I wanted you to scooch over and go to Supported Decision Making. Right? Okay, so go there. And then when it gives you the choices over to the left. Okay, come on.
That must be going on because I don't see anything to the left
Oh,
when
well,
I do that.
Can you make it so I can share?
Yeah.
All right, that's going to be the better way to do it. Hang on.
There you go, Jan. You should be a presenter now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we go, friends. Oop. Okay, desktop just happened. All right, well, now it's going to let me share. Oh, this is so frustrating. Hang on. I'm so sorry, folks. I really wanted to be able to do this, and I forgot that in your training classes, I don't get to do the thing.
So if you have hit the share button, you should be able to.
Yeah, but it says
share
your
this.
desktop, and then this is, oh, there we go, there we go. Can you all see this?
There you go. Yes.
Life Course Access. Okay, so we're going to go down here, and we are going to, I'm going to show you a tool. So let's do the PDF version of it. Okay, you should be able to see this, hopefully still. Tell me if you can. Can you see a supported decision-making agreement?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So if you go out to these life course tools, you can create your own little supported decision-making agreement. So Amy, let's sort of, so you know how you were saying, so Amy, before we started today, shared that she hasn't done anything formal yet. So Amy, why don't you start by sharing with the group, when you have a medical decision to make that you're wanting some assistance with that, who are the people you reach out to? How do you do that now?
As you all know, that know me, I have a good friend who's the fire chief, and he's also a AMT. So I call him, and if he's not busy with his ailing parents, he will help me. Or I talk to the doctor myself. I've gotten to where the staff doesn't come in with me to the doctor's office because they ask too many questions that I don't want him to answer.
Right.
So I do it that way.
Okay. So, but when it's a big decision, right, you're calling the fire chief.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's an informal arrangement. And it's just a friendship you've had for many, many years that I'm jealous of. Just so everyone knows, I'm super jealous of Amy's friendship with her fire chief. So Amy could choose to, and I'm saying this because it's my belief that when we turn 18, we should be doing estate planning tools, which includes making decisions about who's going to help us if we ever need help with medical decisions, right? So Amy could choose to do this with the fire chief. So you would decide, Amy, if this document was going to be legally binding or if it really was just more informal and not legally binding, right?
Yes.
And then you just say you are making this agreement and you choose the supporters to help you make decisions, and then you put your name here. And then this next page is, here's, you can say, I do want these people to help, or let's say there are people you don't want in the room. Like you mentioned, Amy, you don't want the staff in the room, right? I don't want somebody to help with healthcare. So I have a friend who says she does not want her husband to make her end of life decisions because he will never pull the plug and she wants the plug pulled. And so she would put on here, she does not want her husband to help with healthcare. And then you can put who you do want and what the relationship and how to reach them, right? And then you can do, this is the part, Amy. So this is where you could do, so let's say we've got the fire chief. You would have to decide that the fire chief could get and look at your healthcare information, including seeing your private health information under HIPAA. Would that be something you would let him do?
Yes, because I've had a cancer diagnosis too.
Okay. Yep. And he helped you through that?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So maybe would you let him help and make appointments for you?
Well, I do that myself, but he's offered and
Okay.
he could if he needed to.
So, but he wouldn't need to. You wouldn't need him to, right?
No, I do that myself.
Okay. And then can he help you understand your healthcare decisions? Is that one of the roles he plays?
Yes.
How about medications? Do you need him to help you with medications, or yes or no?
He said if I did, he would, but that was my decision. Like I didn't like one medicine they gave me, so I wouldn't take it.
Okay.
It was
Oh,
Vicodin.
okay. So he kind of gave you his opinion on it,
Yes,
right? But then you decided, right?
yes,
Did you take his advice? I'm just curious.
I did.
Did you? Okay.
And yes,
Okay. Now, there are some other questions on here that are not about medical things, right? That maybe the fire chief isn't the one to do that, right? So you probably don't have the fire chief come in helping you with your personal hygiene or that stuff, right? Oh, right. And so who might you might though do a different form, right? Another one of these forms for the person that does that. Who might that be?
yes, my caregivers would help me with that.
Okay, so maybe you would complete a form outlining what the caregivers can and cannot help you with, right?
Yes, yeah.
Um, would the fire chief be the person that would help you understand and access sexual health care?
No, oh no,
So who might do that? Is there someone?
I could do it myself.
Okay. And then how about communicating or helping to communicate your decisions to others? Who might that be in your life?
He has in emergencies.
Okay, so he would be the one that would help you. And then there's places where you can put other things. Like, what are some other things that you've had people help you with?
What doctors I want
Okay.
for the I had kidney cancer
Okay.
in 09, and it was a complete surprise. So I had to have him have a lot of help, and my cousins on both sides of the family came and talked to the doctor about who had cancer and who didn't.
Okay. So you had the fire chief helped you kind of decide on the doctor, and then you brought other people in to sort of help you sort out the history piece, right?
My
Okay.
cousin.
Your cousins. Okay.
On both, one on for each side of the family. That's what the doctor requested.
Okay, so Amy, are there things that you might put on this form that you wouldn't want, that you would not want the fire chief to help you with?
I wouldn't want to have Vicodin. In fact, when I had the cancer diagnosis, they gave me Vicodin after they took the kidney out, and I just took Tylenol. I didn't take the Vicodin.
Okay, so one thing that you would want to put on here maybe was that you don't like the idea of having Vicodin or other medications that have those ingredients. And so if you couldn't say that yourself, you would want to make sure that your supporters didn't let you get Vicodin. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing you would put in this section, right? And then this is the part where, like, when it's time to make financial decisions, there's a whole financial section, which we're not talking about today, but again, there's that whole section where you want to live. So these are some of the kind of documents that you could use, right, that come from charting the life course. Let me see if I can close this and what happens. What happens? Nothing. How do I unshare? Let's see. Am I still sharing anything with you guys?
Yeah, here I can take over.
There we go. I stopped sharing. All right. So that's an example of the life course tools that you could use, right? You could go in there and you could find an actual sample supported decision-making agreement and help the person that you're supporting. Because I think mostly, Amy, we've got professionals on here who would be helping someone like you, a peer support specialist or some case managers or direct support workers, right? And you could help the person you serve think about who and how people would fulfill that role of supporting you in your decision making, right? So that's a really excellent sort of website that is a resource for you when trying to help people come up with the written down part of supported decision making, right? Let's go to the next slide. So then the other tool that's a little more formal, you know, I just showed you sort of an informal tool, right? That supported decision-making agreement, but there are powers of attorney and patient advocate forms are very specific kinds of legal documents, right? That you could also use, and that's what Mary chooses to use as a power of attorney form. We don't have to have a look at that, but I will tell you that the ARC Michigan website has, if you go to the ARC Michigan site, they have a little booklet that talks about supported decision making, and it gives samples of power of attorney forms and patient advocate forms. The other place you can get a patient advocate form that doctors love, your doctor's office will love it and the hospital will love it, is the forms that they themselves at the hospital have. If you've ever been admitted into the hospital, Amy, you might remember this because I think they were doing it even back in 2009, but if you're ever admitted into the hospital, somebody will wander in, it's either the social worker or the nurse, with a patient advocate form. They will ask you if you have one, and if you don't, they will leave it with you, imploring you to fill it out, right? And so those are, what's that?
I was just in December, and that's what they did.
Yeah, and you still didn't fill it out, huh, Amy?
No.
Look at me, I'm giving you a one eye look. I pressure all my friends to make sure they do that they put these things in place so that there's never a question about who's going to support them and help them if they need it, right? So now I'm pressuring you, Amy. But I don't think the fire chief would let anything bad happen, right? I don't think, even if he didn't have the piece of paper, I think he would step in and take over.
Yes.
So those are some of the, oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks. Vicki put it in the chat. The Rethinking Guardianship is the document that you could look at, and they have some really great power of attorney forms. That's the form that my sister uses. So when you see it, you'll know that's the form Mary and Justin used together. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to, again, going back to sort of making the case, right? The National Guardianship Association even says that supported decision-making should be considered before guardianship, right? And that the supported decision-making process should be incorporated as part of the guardianship if guardianship is necessary. We get it. Sometimes there are reasons that the guardianship is in place and needs to be in place, or at least that's what it needs to be right now, right, today. And so though, even if there's a guardianship, I think that using that supported decision-making strategy as part of the way that the guardian makes decisions is really, really important. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So, you know, guardianships need to, this is actually in the mental health code, that guardianship should only be utilized as necessary to promote and protect the well-being of the person and should be designed to encourage the development of maximum self-reliance and autonomy. So if you read that, it would imply, right, that we should be using supported decision-making whenever we can be. And it would also imply that even if there is a guardianship today, that maybe tomorrow it doesn't need to be there, right? If we can build some supports and help a person get to that place where they have people around them. So like Amy, if the fire chief fell off the face of the earth or he went to a vacation to Tahiti, who else do you have in your life that you rely on that can help you make decisions?
Well, if Vicky doesn't mind me saying this, she's one of them. My cousin's another one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got one more family that supported me through everything. In fact, when I need something bad, Jim will call Arkin and his family, and they will come in and say, okay, this is what you need, here it is. And it's like, okay.
So Amy, when I hear you talk about your backups, even let's bring the fire chief back from Tahiti. When I hear you talk about the people that are important in your life that help you in your decision-making process, some of them are family, right? And people that you know because of family, but some of them are people you've gained relationships along the way, right? And in the case of Vicky, she's a person that started out as a paid support to you and then became a colleague and a friend, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think, again, like those of you who are working with folks that maybe you're going, well, who would be their person, right? To think about what strategies then can we employ, or how can we think about helping them to build some people around them, right? Amy, the fire chief, he wasn't standing there when you were born, was he?
No.
No, you had to find him. You guys had, yeah, you had to find each other. And so I think a big part of when we're trying to support folks that maybe don't already have those connections, right? And trying to help them think about how do we help them gain those connections, that's a big part of our job as social workers and case managers and direct support professionals. You know, Mary met Mark because I was a direct support professional and our agency had these gatherings where we invited community members, right? Where we were allowed to invite our spouse. So Mary met the man that, actually, I'll just tell this little sidebar story of how important Mark became to Mary. When Mark and I were getting a divorce, because we did end up divorcing right a little bit before he died. And we went to tell Mary together that we were getting a divorce. And now I was her direct support professional. Then I was her case manager. And I was the one that like sat in the hospital with her when she was, puking her guts out one time when she had influenza, whatever. I was the one that helped her in the shower when she lived at our house, whatever. She says to me, not to Mark, but to me, oh my gosh, Jan, will I ever see you anymore? Because, she was sticking with Mark in case there was going to be any acrimony. So that's how close the two of them got, right? And so, but he started out as being like just a guy who showed up at a party. And so how can we notice when connections are being made when we're social workers and case managers and direct support professionals? How can we nurture and develop those positive relationships, right? I don't know, Amy, how you and the fire chief became so close, but do you have a theory about that?
My mother had a food program, and we used to feed in Walled Lake 200 people a month, once a month, and she needed a place to have all these people. And they had a little building. They next to the firehouse.
Okay.
And she talked him into letting her have it once a month or thereabouts when she needed it. And that's how we got to be friends.
So think about that story, right? I mean, that started out as a business transaction, right? Your mom needed a place to, like, she was renting space essentially, or getting free space. She was negotiating for free space, but she was trying to get, it was a business transaction. She needed space, he had space. But then over time that evolved, right? And so I think, again, when we're trying to nurture those connections that can allow for supported decision making to take place, we just have to be willing to look in all of the places and all of the spaces and really help people nurture those friendships and relationships that they have. Can we go to the next slide? I want to just talk to you about what the law says must be necessary to even start a guardianship. Some of the people on this screen have maybe filed petitions for guardianship before, or maybe they've been a part of that. They've been a witness or have provided testimony. But there are two things that are necessary in Michigan for a person with developmental disabilities to get a guardianship. This is the Mental Health Code guardianship statute. And one is lack of capacity, which means that, you need help with all these daily activity things, right? Lots of people do. But then the other part is the necessity. So not only do you have to show that the person lacks some capacity in some areas of, independent financial, being financially independent or being able to maintain their home or whatever, but you also have to show that the guardianship is necessary or else the person's life would implode. Well, when you have people around you, Amy has people around her that care about her, that are not going to let her life implode. So therefore, even though she might need help with some things that are listed on the guardianship statute, it's not necessary because she's got the support in place to prevent the necessity of it, right? And so I think that's just really important to remember, that as we're helping people build their quality connections and helping them find those people that can be their champions and their cheerleaders and their mentors and the people they go to for advice, we are reducing the need to use guardianship as the tool to assure that people get the medical care that they need. Do we want to go to the next slide? There we go. Again, we're going back to addressing the concerns. And, if you go back and remember that form I showed you, it actually lists pretty much all of these things as subcategories that you could decide who's going to help you with those things, right? Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so I want to tell you a story about Tom and Charlotte and medical decision making. So both Tom and Charlotte had lived in the state institution in Mount Pleasant. So they had lived at the Mount Pleasant Center. Charlotte from the time she was like, I think 2 years old, and Tom from the time he was big enough that his mom could no longer lift him in and out of his wheelchair by herself. So he was about 11 when he moved into the institution. They both lived at Mount Pleasant Center in the same cottage. If anybody's ever seen those old institutions, like a cottage would have like 2 apartments, about 16 people on each side, the boys on one side, the girls on the other, with an area in the middle where they ate dinner and socialized and such. So they were both there. Tom was about, 6 or 7 years older than Charlotte, but he and Charlotte became friends. And as they grew into adulthood, they fell in love. But they lived in an institution, so they didn't think they were ever going to be able to do anything about being in love. So, there they were in love. They would sneak kisses, when they could, whatever. But then came this beautiful day when they were all going to be moved out of the institution into these 6-bed group homes. Nobody asked Char and Tom if they wanted to be together. Nobody asked anybody if they wanted to be together. There were people in a room that were playing chess with the bodies, saying, "Oh, these 6 would probably not fight and probably do well together. These 6 would probably do well together." Well, luckily, just by sheer luck, Char and Tom ended up in the same group home in Midland. Whew, what luck, because they were, after all, in love. So their romance continued a little bit more out in the open in this group home, and there were a bunch of, they moved in 1980, so it was like the early 80s, and so a lot of the staff that were working in the group home, including me, were like, we were children of the 60s and 70s, and so we believed that love should flourish no matter what. And so they got to have their their courtship, pretty decently. But then they wanted to get married. Tom wanted to marry Charlotte. So then that was going to be a no-go from the system perspective. Tom and Char fought. They went to court. They fought the man, and they were able to get married. So then they got married and they moved into their own home. They were some of the first people in Michigan back when the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation was introducing us to these notions of self-determination. They were some of the first people to hire their own staff directly and manage their own supports and all of those things. They traveled all over the country teaching people about self-determination. And then just a few years ago, Charlotte became terribly ill. Now both Char and Tom had guardians when they were younger, and they had gotten them terminated. That had to happen in order for them to marry. So neither of them had a guardian. And they'd always been, they both used wheelchairs and had like medical stuff, but like not the kind of stuff that, where you'd have to make big, massive decisions, right? And so Charlotte became very ill with a respiratory infection. And she went into the hospital, and a decision had to be made to intubate her, which that happened. But then she wasn't getting better. And so it became apparent that someone was going to need to decide when was going to be the time to shut off that ventilator, And so Tom got super scared because he has a developmental disability. He has a clear intellectual disability. He can't read. People know he has a developmental disability, and he was so scared that the doctors were going to either get an emergency petition for guardianship for Charlotte, or some other way give someone power over Charlotte's life and death. And so he called me. I was the maid of honor in their wedding, so we were old friends, and although I didn't work with them anymore, I was their friend. And so he called me and asked me to come to the hospital, which I did. And we had a meeting with the doctors, and helped them understand that Tom is her husband. And so in the state of Michigan, your next of kin makes decisions for you if you haven't done any kind of estate planning, right? And so because Charlotte didn't have any patient advocate forms or any of that, that means her next of kin gets to decide her medical care. And her next of kin was her legal husband, Thomas. And so we helped the doctors understand that Tom was the decision maker. And so that meant that Tom needed to be supported to make the decision for his wife. And I'm going to tell you, I'm very happy to report that it wasn't hard to convince the doctors of this. It wasn't hard to convince the hospital, with their lawyers and liability and blah, blah, blah. I mean, they got it. They understood. And so then what happened is there was this like almost supported decision making by proxy kind of thing that happened, because Charlotte couldn't make the decision. And Tom had to make that decision, but he needed help. And so his circle then surrounded him, and he, talked it through with the people that he trusted and felt confident and close with, and was able to make the decision regarding Charlotte, which the decision that he ended up making was that there was no, it was clear there was no chance that she was ever going to come back from this. And so he chose the time to have the doctors turn off the ventilator, and he was able to be with her. And it was actually a really lovely moment, because the doctor actually himself came in and helped position, he uses a wheelchair. She used a wheelchair, not that mattered, but he helped position her so that he was holding her when she passed away. But everyone in that hospital respected Tom's ability and his legal right to make that decision. And I tell that story because sometimes people think that they're going to run into a lot of trouble when they go to the hospital. Like if you don't have a guardian, you're going to run into trouble being able to get access to medical care, or you're going to run into trouble with somebody at the hospital thinking you can't make that decision, and it might delay your care, or it might cause you to then, have to wait on your care until they get you a guardian or whatever. Like there's sometimes this fear that without a guardian, that the decision's going to be taken out of your hands anyway. And I guess what I would say is that that's not necessarily the case, right? again, I think a strategy that the social workers can play and the case managers and even the direct support professionals can play is making sure that when people are going to medical appointments or when they're in the hospital, that all of those medical professionals understand that they are the decision maker and here's how they get supported to do that. Right. And then it can happen. A few years after Shar passed away, just last year, Tom, it was discovered had cancer that had spread too far. And he made the decision. He had to decide between going through some grueling, chemotherapy and radiation therapy that maybe had about a 10% chance of being, successful, or entering hospice. And he again brought his circle around and he made that really important and tough decision. And he lived his life and he ended his life the way he wanted to on his terms. And he was the one that was in the driver's seat throughout the whole entire thing. And so again, what's the role that those of us who support someone play, right, when they are making those big medical decisions, right, is to listen to them, to only offer advice when it's asked for, to make sure that the people that are closest to them are available and have access to them, right, and can have those conversations. So yeah, that's sort of what it can look like, right, what supported decision making can look like in a medical in the medical world. I have to tell you, I've been with people at Henry Ford numerous times. I'm on quite a few. I'm the patient advocate for quite a few of my friends, and I'm telling you, once you show them something that even looks remotely official, they go with it. They're not going to argue with you if it's not a guardianship document. In fact, at Henry Ford Hospital, they kind of prefer that it be something that's a little bit more clear cut, like a power of attorney or those patient advocate forms. So, what questions do people have?
Either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Any questions?
Can they unmute and yeah,
you can unmute and ask the question.
I have a question. Hi. How do you make a supported decision-making agreement legally binding here in our state?
so there's it's like a common law. It's called a common law agreement, and so you just say it is. That's why on that, if you saw on that supported decision-making form, how you could circle that this is legally binding, you're saying, I want this to be legally binding. You're announcing it, you're pronouncing it. Now, some families go to lawyers and have lawyers write it up in very lawyerese. However, I'm going to tell you something about that. When you have a document like that, like a power of attorney or the supported decision-making agreement, if it's ever challenged, you have to be able to prove that the person who signed it understands what it said, right? I can barely understand the things that my lawyer writes up, and I kind of I consider myself a little bit of a legal junkie, but I still sometimes can't understand everything they're saying. And so it's really important that you have those simpler kinds of documents, but you can have a lawyer write it and then they can make sure, or you use the very language, like if you look at those supported decision-making documents, or you look at this rethinking guardianship tool, use those words, don't change those words. And the reason I say that is because attorneys actually wrote the sample documents that are in the ARC Michigan's guide, and attorneys consulted on those life course documents, so we know that they've got the right legal words, right?
So I just want to also reiterate or make clear that supported decision-making is a way to support individuals. It's not a document in of itself.
Right.
Like an individual plan of service is a document that people sign, they agree to these types of services. Throughout our training series last year and this year, we talked about different tools that people could use to help them in the supported decision-making. So, I think we all, as Mary or Jan had said, we all do this. And I think we forget sometimes we're more like persons with a disability or people that we support than we're dissimilar. So I think she was talking about her friends there who had gotten married. And I think about when my husband has to go to the doctor, I have a little consultation with him to make sure he talks to the doctor about all the things that are necessary to be talked about, because he forgets, or he he just doesn't think about it. And sometimes I send him with notes. And then actually one time, he and his doctor, when he was at his appointment, called me to make sure they were clear about all the things I was concerned about and that needed to be addressed. I have my oldest son recently went to the doctors for a chronic health concern that he has, and he does not have a disability. But again, his wife and I were kind of consulting with him about what do you need to talk to the doctor about, because these are the things we're seeing, and making sure that you talk to the doctor. And then, and then after he had his appointment, we talked to him about, okay, what was the outcome, and part of that is also knowing how to support him. All right. So, I agree, and Jan's going to give me the evil eye, but I too need to have a power of attorney for health reasons, and for our financial stuff, we already have a living trust set up, but really we need a power of attorney for our health, someone to be our health advocate if we need it. We haven't done that.
Well, and I want to just also say, you want it to be recognized. It doesn't necessarily need to be legally binding, but you want it to be recognized and accepted, right? And so it's not about like, okay, so I, Jan Lampman, signed and said that Justin can make my medical decisions. Now I have to stick to that, because I never have to stick to that. I can change my mind anytime I want. However, if I've signed that, I want that doctor to stick to it. And that's where you want the legal bindingness of it, or the recognition of it as being legitimate, is with the people that you want to talk to your supports, right? So again, what's more important around those documents is that you make sure that the medical professionals that see them go, oh yeah, okay, now I get it. I know what I need to do. And I will tell you that it takes a little training with the doctors sometimes, which is again a role that I think that when we think about, I don't know how many of you are direct support professionals or how many are case managers or other kinds of social workers, but like a case management function is, right, some of that coordinating and linking. And one of the things that I think is a really important role for a social worker might be to help the doctor understand who are this person's important people, and this is how this works. You can't talk to Mary Wheeler without talking to Justin Lampman. You can't. Don't do it. Don't try it. Because Mary's
because that was her decision.
Yes, because she decided that's how it was going to be. And she'll get mad. Like sometimes she'll be like every once in a while, a new nurse will be at her doctor's office and they'll be like trying to press her on something like, oh, Mary, you really should get your flu shot. And she goes, have you talked to Mark? And, they'll be like, they're new. They don't know, right? They haven't read her chart. So they're like, well, who are you even talking about? And then she'll just get infuriated. And she has this little cute fiery thing she does when she's mad that I'm the only one on earth who thinks it's cute, because it's probably kind of obnoxious. But then they learn, they realize, oh, wait. And then they go read the document and they realize they can't just talk to Mary. She wants them to also talk to Justin, and then the two of them will talk and then they'll decide, right? And that's how Mary wants it. And she will make sure. But so our job as the supporters, the paid supporters, I think, is to help make sure that the people that are around. So Amy, now I know. So if you and I are together and, I don't know, you fall down the stairs and you bump your head, I'm going to make sure the doctor knows we got to call. Wait, we got this fire chief we got to call, right? Now, I don't know the fire chief's number, so I'm going to call Vicki and hopefully she knows the fire chief's number. But we're going to get the fire chief here, right? Because I know that.
Yeah.
And so
I've got him in my phone under Vicky for.
And I'll just grab your phone.
Perfect.
Yeah. But the point is, and I say that, Amy, because it was reminding me of a story with Tom one time when he and I were on a conference together, and he accidentally drove off the edge of this sunken floor in a bar that you couldn't really tell because it was dark in the bar, and he fell, and yeah, so we were in an ER. But the point is that our job is to make sure that when Mary, we'll use Mary as the example, when Mary's made her decision about who her person is, not me, but my son, then we have to make sure her doctors understand that it's Justin and Mary, they're a team, right? And that's a good role for a case manager, I think.
And Jan, I'd like to say something. If you have two kids, make sure that they both know what your wishes are, because one child, I know with my mother, she always thought my sister would live before after she died, and it was the other way around. My sister died
Right.
before my mom, and I didn't know what I was doing, but they all helped me, and I had to plan the funeral and
So we have a
everything.
We do have one
Please.
more question I want to try to get. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw it. Vicky.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but we only have a minute and I want to get to this question. So Kimberly is asking about supported decision-making related to parents with a child who is in the mental health system. And I think you probably mean like a child who has a mental illness as opposed to a developmental disability. Am I right about that? Kimberly?
Yes, shaking
Okay.
his head, yes. She's shaking her
Okay.
head, yes.
I can only see a couple people. I can only see Emily and whoever's in the room with Emily. So
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
okay, thanks, Kimberly. So yeah, so that becomes a little bit harder, right? Because so sometimes the person, on a good day, like when things are going well and when you're feeling mentally healthy, you might say, yeah, I want my mom to help me, right? But then let's say, I had a family member with bipolar disorder, and when she was, manic and hypomanic, everything that she said on a day when she was feeling well, she throws out the window. She tosses right out the window, right? And so how do you manage that? And so some of the things that we talk about are, that's kind of why we sometimes have some of these agreements that are written down, right? Because you can actually put language in there that talks about, today I'm feeling great, and this is what I'm saying that I want. This is who I want to help me. Next week, if I become hypomanic, I might change my mind, right? And then you can put in there, if I say that I've changed my mind when I'm hypomanic, this is how I'd like you to help me. Now, it doesn't become legally binding because, again, the person has the right to say, never mind, I don't want my mom anymore. But it's a way to start a conversation with that person who's hypomanic, right? To try to help them to remember that, wait, right now you need a little bit of help. This is who you said you wanted to help you. And so you can do some things like that. There's advanced directives. So like, let's say that on my good day, I say I want my sister to help me. And then I'm hypomanic and I'm like, yeah, no, she's not helping me. But I'm about to go into the hospital. And so I go into the hospital and the psychiatrist says, Jan's not in a place where she can be making decisions. Well, guess what? I filled out the advanced directive that says that my sister's the one. Right. And so she can come in and then help make some decisions. And so there's some of that kind of also, it's the same kind of power of attorney that like a lot of senior citizens fill out, that when I'm, in my death throes coma, that's when this thing kicks in. But until then, I'm the one. So you can use those kinds of tools that become effective when you become incapacitated. Basically.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good question. Next slide, just so we can wrap up.
Oh, yep. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. You got to know about that.
No
People-
worries.
people are
Jan. We really appreciate, Jan, you sharing your life experiences as well as your knowledge with us. That was fantastic. You as well, Amy. So just a reminder, we do offer 1 social work credit for this. You do have to complete the survey in order to receive that credit, and then you'll get your certificate. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we do have a few more training series in August. We're going to be talking about what type of assistive technology can be used to help people through supported decision-making to be independent and included in the community. September, we're going to talk about, all right, so I have a guardianship. How might we go about terminating that? What is that process?
Oh, that's a whole thing.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
There are ways. That's another
Yeah.
session. Do you have that scheduled?
We have it for September, yes.
Okay.
And then in October, as I mentioned, the state work group is working on a toolkit that encompasses these various tools that we're talking about in our sessions, and we hope to be able to preview that. Then if you want, all these trainings are recorded, are ones we did in 21 as well as this year. If you go to our website, click on resources, recorded training, and you scroll down the supported decision-making webinar series, you'll see 21 and 22 sessions. All our sessions this year were 1 hour. Last year, they were an hour and a half. Next slide. So thanks for attending. We appreciate it. Thank you for our presenters. We very much appreciate your time, knowledge, and sharing of your personal experiences. And I believe in the chat, Kaylee has did you put the link to the survey, Kaylee?
Yes, it's just posted now.
There you go. So if you complete that survey, that's great. It gives us good information to provide feedback to our trainers, as well as for us to plan for future trainings. Anybody have anything else they need to say? Thanks so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. And Kaylee and I will hang around for a little while, just to make sure you're having okay to get to that survey, or if you have any questions for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Vicky. Thank you.
Bye, Amy. Thanks for sharing.
Bye, Jan.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So I am a psychologist, and I've recently started interpreting the psychological evaluations for guardianship cases, specifically in an intellectual and developmental disability program. And so typically these aren't necessarily my clients. I get the evaluations and I interpret the results and talk with the client and the family about, which powers are going to be given over as a guardian. And I know that obviously the client has to, choose their guardian, that they have to consent to that. However, consent can be tricky. I feel like with the population sometimes, especially if you have a client who's non-verbal. So would you recommend, for like, if you got a case of a client had requested a guardian, the guardianship, that before proceeding with that, to go through some of these, maybe just pull out some of these supported decision-making forms and go through this with them? Or would you suggest that their individual therapist do that with them before?
I think anybody can talk to an individual about, hey, here are some other choices. Guardianship, I think sometimes folks don't know they have other choices, and they think guardianship might be the only one, or they're scared. And guardianship sometimes seems a little clearer because they don't understand what other options might be available.
Right.
So anybody can talk to a person about supported decision making. The thing is, with guardianship, it becomes a court process.
Right.
And the court controls the guardianship. And if the court puts guardianship into place, the court can decide that they do or do not want to take out guardianship. Because there are times when people have gone, and even the guardian has gone with the individual and said, hey, we don't think that guardianship is needed. And the judge will say, well, I do. So it's staying.
Okay.
No, sometimes they will choose, okay, they have to convince the judge that the person no longer needs a guardian. So that's the other piece that to me seems a little bit scary, is now you've put your life and all your decisions into the court, is making those decisions about your guardian, about who gets to make your decisions.
Can that also happen with so far the only type of guardianship that I've signed over is a partial? So could that happen if I know that has to be renewed? So if that isn't renewed, could the judge say, make a decision to renew it themselves?
It depends on the judge. I've just heard instances where that has occurred. I am not an expert on the court, nor I've gone to court. I know Jan has gone to court many times with people to end guardianship. But you have to have a conversation, and I think you probably have to show the judge you have a plan in place. Here's who's going to support this person. We're going to do a power of attorney, or, he's got this support around them for these issues, or,
Okay. Okay, that is helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, sure.